Dusty's horizon. Sunbeams, thick with stirred-up grit, knifed into the barn's dim interior. Dusty Rivers tightened Betsy's saddle girth, the aged leather groaning a somber tune that echoed the mournful calls of his meager cattle herd. Loneliness clung to him like the adobe dust coating his boots, a decade-long shadow since Martha's passing. A cough rattled in his chest, the ever-present dust a persistent irritant. Daybreak again, painting the same weary panorama. He peered at the horizon, a wavering line promising heat and hardship. River's End, his ranch, a fitting epitaph. It marked the terminus of things, the trail's end, the fading of hope, the best not to dwell. He never did. Leading Betsy from the barn, her hoofbeats provided a steady rhythm against the whisper of wind through the parched grasses. The north fence needed repair. The coyotes grew bolder, and old Maggie, his pride, though his pride alone, was due to calf. Heading toward the northern pasture, a distant shimmer snagged his attention. Not a prairie fire, too deliberate. He halted Betsy, shading his eyes. The shimmer sharpened, coalescing into a dust plume and a sound unmistakably like music. The music, reedy and jarring, escalated, punctuated by a man's booming sales pitch. Dusty scowled. Nobody visited River's End, save for the occasional taxman, and he lacked such grand pronouncements. Curiosity, a long-absent guest, stirred within him. He urged Betsy onward. She responded with a tired exhale. Reaching a rise, the source of the ruckus materialized. A wagon, painted in hues that shrieked for attention, sat squarely on his property, close to the creek bed he only half-heartedly called a water source. A small throng, mostly unfamiliar faces from neighboring spreads, clustered around, their expressions a blend of anticipation and greed. Banners snapped in the breeze, proclaiming Jedediah Stone's traveling emporium and auction. Jedediah Stone, a man whose grin could grease a wagon wheel and whose eyes missed nothing, stood on the wagon's makeshift stage, hollering into a brass megaphone. "Gather round, folks. Fortunes await, riches beyond imagining. Snag unique and prized items at unheard-of prices." Dusty watched from the periphery, hand hovering near the well-worn grip of his Colt Peacemaker. He mistrusted slick operators, and Jedediah Stone looked capable of selling sand to a desert nomad. Yet, the sheer novelty, the unexpected break in his humdrum existence, held him fast. He noticed Caleb Johnson from the neighboring ranch, a man known for his parsimony, looking almost eager. Martha always said Dusty was too isolated, needed a mingle. Maybe she had a point. Maybe a little diversion wouldn't kill him. Jedediah Stone's gaze swept across the assembly, briefly lingering on Dusty. A shadow, calculation, flickered across his features before the oily smile resurfaced. "And who have we here? A latecomer to our little party. Welcome, friend. Welcome." A warmth crept up Dusty's neck. He'd hoped to remain unseen. He shifted in the saddle, his eyes drawn to the items arrayed on and around the wagon. Brightly colored fabrics, rusty implements, bottles filled with dubious-looking liquids, and a large, elaborate cage. He frowned. What was Stone doing with a birdcage? The auction commenced. Jedediah Stone cleared his throat, his voice amplified by the megaphone. "Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's start with a bona fide gem, a genuine, antique grandfather clock, imported directly from—" He winked. "Well, let's just say from afar." Dusty dismounted, tethering Betsy to a stunted mesquite. He told himself he was merely observing. He wouldn't bid. He needed nothing. He possessed all he required right here at River's End. Didn't he? The auction proceeded, Jedediah Stone skillfully playing the crowd, squeezing every last cent from their wallets. Dusty observed a silent presence, his hand never straying far from his weapon. He watched Caleb Johnson competitively bid on used plowshares, his face flushed with effort. He saw Mrs. Henderson, the widowed Henderson, eyeing a length of scarlet silk with obvious yearning. The sun blazed down, the air dense with dust, sweat, and a hint of desperation. A familiar lethargy washed over Dusty. He should simply return home. He didn't belong amidst this fevered exchange. But then, Jedediah Stone's voice sliced through the commotion. And now, the grand finale, ladies and gents, a truly unparalleled and exotic piece. Something you absolutely won't find anywhere else round these parts. He made a sweeping gesture toward the ornate birdcage. Behold, with a flourish, he whisked aside a heavy drape, revealing its occupant. Dusty's breath hitched. It wasn't a bird inside. $5 for a star. The auction started slow, a wheezing pump organ leading the charge. Jed Stone, all smiles and slick-back hair, hawked rusty farm tools, moth-eaten blankets, and cracked china dolls. The crowd, initially buzzing with excitement, began to thin, their pockets lighter and their enthusiasm waning. Dusty stood at the edge, boots sinking into the dry earth, a grim line etched around his mouth. He hadn't intended to buy anything, hadn't intended to even stay, but something about the day felt off. Then came the birdcage. The heavy velvet drape was drawn back with a flourish, revealing not a feathered creature, but a girl. Small, no older than 10, with skin the color of rich earth and eyes like polished obsidian. She was curled in the bottom of the cage, her thin dress ripped and stained. Fear radiated from her like heat from a forge. A collective gasp rippled through the remaining onlookers. Dusty felt a jolt, a primal surge of anger and protectiveness he hadn't experienced since Martha. He gripped the fence post, knuckles white. Jed Stone's voice, previously booming and jovial, took on a nervous edge. Now, folks, here we have a unique opportunity. A genuine Native American artifact. A chance to own a piece of the Wild West. He chuckled, the sound hollow and unconvincing. She's untamed, of course, but with a little guidance, she could be quite useful. Sheriff Johnson, who had been leaning against the general store, straightened up, his hand instinctively moving towards his holster. A low murmur spread through the crowd, a mixture of discomfort and morbid curiosity. No one bid. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Dusty saw the girl flinch, her eyes darting around the crowd like a trapped animal. He saw the raw terror in her face, the utter hopelessness. Something snapped inside him. He couldn't explain it, couldn't justify it, but he knew he had to do something. $5, he heard himself say. The words hung in the air, shocking even him. All eyes turned to Dusty, their expressions a mix of disbelief and pity. Jed Stone's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. $5? He repeated, his voice tight. Come now, Mr. Rivers, surely you jest. This is a rare opportunity. Dusty met Stone's gaze, his own unwavering. $5 is my bid. Another long silence. The sheriff stepped forward slightly, his eyes narrowed, assessing the situation. The crowd shifted uneasily, sensing the tension. Stone glanced around, desperation creeping into his voice. Anyone? Surely someone can outbid $5. A dime? A nickel? He gestured wildly at the girl in the cage. Think of the possibilities. No one spoke. No one moved. Stone's face flushed crimson. He opened his mouth to protest, but then seemed to reconsider. A calculating glint entered his eyes. $5 was better than nothing, and perhaps this was a way to be rid of a problem. Going once, he said, his voice strained. Going twice, sold. To Mr. Rivers for $5. A low murmur swept through the crowd. Dusty pushed himself away from the fence, his heart pounding in his chest. What had he done? He walked towards a makeshift stage, his boots heavy in the dust. Stone practically shoved a crudely written bill of sale into Dusty's hand. Here you go, Rivers. Your property. Enjoy. He spat the words out like venom. And good riddance. Dusty ignored him, his focus on the girl in the cage. He fumbled with the rusty latch, his fingers clumsy. The girl recoiled, pressing herself against the back of the cage, her eyes wide with fear. It's all right, Dusty said, his voice rough but gentle. I'm not going to hurt you. He finally managed to open the cage. The girl remained huddled inside, her body trembling. Dusty reached out a hand, hesitantly. Come on, he said softly. It's over now. Silent Ranch. The journey back crawled by in near silence, broken only by the buckboard's complaint and the steady drum of hooves on packed dirt. Tala sat ramrod straight beside Dusty, dwarfed by the blanket engulfing her small form. Her gaze was fixed, distant, lost somewhere beyond the horizon's rim. Dusty stole glances, a cold fist clenching in his stomach. What demons haunted her thoughts? What horrors had those young eyes already absorbed? The ranch house, usually a welcome sight after backbreaking work, loomed strangely ominous. The sinking sun stretched the cottonwoods into gnarled, grasping fingers, amplifying the building's stark emptiness. Dusty reined in before the porch. He stepped down, offering a hand. Tala recoiled, a visible flinch. "Easy, little star," he soothed, using the name overheard at that wretched auction. "I won't hurt you." Silence. No acknowledgement. With a quiet sigh, Dusty gently lifted her, his hands careful beneath her frail arms. Her body remained stiff, unyielding. He set her down, but she stood frozen, a miniature statue carved from stubborn resistance in the fading light. Dusty ushered her inside, the dry scent of aged wood and sun-baked dust filling his nostrils. Simple. Borda. A table of rough-hewn planks, a scattering of chairs, a wood-burning stove radiating the day's heat, a bed draped with a crazy quilt. He indicated the bed. "You can sleep there. I'll take the floor." No response. She remained planted just inside the door, her eyes flickering, cataloging every detail. Not trust, but a profound, guarded suspicion shone in their depths. Dusty preoccupied himself with striking a match, the lamp's sudden glow pushing back the encroaching shadows. From a cupboard, he retrieved a dented plate and a worn fork, then ladled a generous portion of beans and salt pork from the simmering pot. He placed the offering on the table, hoping the scent would tempt her. "Here," he urged softly, pushing the plate closer. "Eat. You must be starved." Still nothing. Arms crossed tight, a barricade against him. Dusty's patience, already stretched taut, threatened to snap. He understood the fear, but her unwavering refusal stung. He knelt, meeting her at eye level. "Little star," he said, his tone a careful balance of gentleness and resolve. "I want to help, but you have to let me. Please, just try a bite." At last, her gaze locked with his, a turbulent mix of fear and defiance churning within those dark pools. And something else, a flicker of raw, untamed spirit that reminded him of a wild filly. He held her gaze for a beat too long, then slowly retreated. He wouldn't force her. He wouldn't break what remained unbroken. "All right," he conceded. "I'll leave you be, but the food's there if you want it." He retreated to the room's edge, settling onto the hard floor with a blanket and a lumpy pillow. From the corner of his eye, he watched, his heart aching for the small, silent figure who carried a weight far beyond her years. Hours bled into the night. Dusty lay awake, keenly aware of the symphony of the plains, the mournful hoot of an owl, a distant coyote's lonely serenade, the whispering dance of leaves in the night wind. He could hear Tala's shallow breaths in the darkness, her small frame coiled tight with unspoken tension. He wondered about her kin, her people. Where were they now? What cruel fate had befallen them? Questions without answers spiraled through his mind. A sharp pang of guilt, of responsibility, pierced him. He had taken her from whatever life she had known, however meager. Now, he had to forge a new one. As the first pale streaks of dawn painted the eastern sky, sleep finally claimed Dusty, his dreams haunted by wide, frightened eyes and a silent, indomitable girl. He couldn't foresee the path ahead, but one conviction burned bright. He wouldn't fail her. He would earn her trust, even if it demanded every ounce of his fortitude. He would offer her a haven, a belonging, a future unburdened by terror. He owed her nothing less. Whispers of the past. The following days unfolded in a delicate choreography of approach and withdrawal. Each dawn found Dusty awake before the sun, the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee permeating the cabin. A plate of sustenance, perhaps fried eggs and bacon, or a piece of ripe fruit, would be left just inside Tala's doorway, Dusty melting back into the shadows before she appeared. He maintained a respectful silence, never initiating conversation, never imposing or interrogating. Ranch work occupied his hours, repairing broken rails, caring for the herd, yet always conscious of her quiet presence nearby. He'd occasionally glimpse her silhouette in the window, a silent observer of his industry. At times, faint imprints in the soil near the corral hinted at her tentative explorations beyond the confines of the house. One afternoon, while mending a fence line, he sensed, rather than saw, her arrival. He lifted his gaze. Tala stood a few yards away, her dark eyes riveted on his hands. He resumed his task, the resonant ring of the hammer against the metal a steady pulse in the quiet afternoon. After an extended pause, she edged a step closer, then another, drawn by an invisible thread. He continued working, his movements unhurried and deliberate, giving her agency. By the time she stood within arm's reach, he could detect the faint, evocative scent of wood smoke clinging to her dark tresses. She gestured towards the hammer with a tentative finger. He ceased his labors, setting the tool aside. Instead, he retrieved a small piece of scrap wood and a nail, offering them to her. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly, and she reached out, her fingertips brushing against his as she accepted the offering. He demonstrated the proper grip, the correct angle, the way to steady the nail. She observed with intense focus, mirroring his actions with surprising coordination. Her first attempt went awry, resulting in a glancing blow to her thumb. A sharp, involuntary gasp escaped her lips, though she remained otherwise silent. Dusty instinctively reached to examine her hand, but she recoiled. He paused, raising his hands in a gesture of appeasement. He pointed to her injured thumb, then to his own, mimicking a wince of pain. Comprehension dawned in her eyes, followed by the ghost of a smile playing on her lips. Days drifted into weeks. The silence between them evolved, transforming from a wall into a shared, unspoken understanding. Tala began to participate in the simpler chores, collecting eggs from the hen house, scattering feed for the chickens, tending the small kitchen garden Dusty maintained near the back porch. One evening, as twilight bled across the sky in vibrant shades of apricot and rose, Dusty sat whittling on the porch steps. Tala settled beside him, maintaining a respectful distance, her gaze fixed on the horizon. He turned to her, her features illuminated by the dying light. "Pretty, isn't it?" he murmured. She hesitated, her attention still focused on the distant hills. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she uttered, "Like little star?" Dusty's hand froze, his heart twisting at the sound of her broken voice. "Little star?" he inquired softly, almost afraid to break the spell. She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears as she took a breath. "Tala is little star." He held his silence, waiting with infinite patience for the words to come. Before soldiers, she began, her voice trembling, barely audible. "My mother, she call me Tala. Mean little star in my language." She glanced downward at her slender fingers, tracing the wood grain of the porch. "We live in mountains," she pressed on, her voice gaining slight strength. "My father, good hunter. My mother, make beautiful blankets. Happy." Her voice cracked, a sob wrenching free. Dusty remained still, providing the quiet and safe space in the world for her grief, for her recollections. "Then they come," she whispered, her voice flat and deadened. "Soldiers. Burn village. Kill everyone." She clutched herself, arms wrapped tight, as if to contain the chilling memory. He longed to offer comfort, to hold her, but he understood. He simply remained a steadfast presence, a haven in the tempest of her past. After a protracted silence, she finally lifted her gaze to meet his, her eyes brimming with grief and defiance. "I go back," she stated, her voice surprisingly resolute. "Someday I go back, my people." Dusty held her gaze steadily, his own brimming with empathy and respect. "I know you will, little star," he affirmed quietly. "I know you will." The storm's fury. The wind, a guttural murmur all morning, escalated into a ferocious bellow. Miniature cyclones of ochre dust pirouette across the baked earth, smearing the windows of the ranch house with ruddy grit. Above, the sky, a canvas of livid purples, bore down on the homestead, pregnant with foreboding. Dusty squinted toward the horizon, a knot of apprehension tightening in his stomach. This was no ordinary summer tempest. This harbored a deeper malice. He located Tala by the creek, observing the turbulent water's restless dance. Even as the gale lashed her raven hair across her face, an unsettling serenity radiated from her. "Little star, storms come in fierce." "Real fierce," he rasped, his words swallowed by the escalating winds. She didn't so much as blink, her attention riveted to the swirling current. The wind cries with bitterness, dusty rivers, and the creek echoes its lament. It offers warning. Usually quick to dismiss such notions, Dusty felt a surprising tinge of respect. He'd witnessed firsthand her profound connection to this land, a silent communion beyond his grasp. "All right," he conceded, slapping his thighs. "Let's secure the stock. Barn door needs beefing up, too. Reckon you can wrangle the chickens?" Tala nodded, her eyes kindled with an eerie luminescence. "I will reason with them. They are receptive." Dusty chuckled, though he hurried towards the barn, a sense of urgency gripping him. Inside, the horses were already jittery, their hooves a nervous tattoo against the earthen floor. He worked with frantic efficiency, adding supplementary braces to the thick planks of the door, the wind shrieking like a harpy in his ears. A quick glance towards the house revealed Tala, a diminutive silhouette against the raging sky, arms extended, seemingly in earnest conversation with the cluster of hens huddled near the porch. Plump raindrops began to plummet, splattering against the arid ground, instantly transforming dust into clinging muck. Lightning cleaved the sky, momentarily etching the landscape in stark relief. The horses voiced their mounting terror with shrill whinnies. Dusty completed the barn door's fortification and bolted towards the house, the wind a physical force threatening to bowl him over. He found Tala calmly directing the last of the chickens into a makeshift refuge fashioned from a discarded wagon wheel and a salvaged tarp. "House windows," she hollered above the clamor. "Seal them. Swiftly." He offered no argument. Seizing the spare lumber stacked near the shed, he began securing the windows, the deluge now descending in relentless sheets, plastering his hair to his scalp. They labored in tandem, her small hands possessing a strength and deftness that belied her size. As they finished the last window, a thunderclap of staggering force rent the air, followed by a flash of lightning so intense it burned afterimages onto his retinas. The earth trembled beneath them. "The creek," Tala cried, gesturing towards the engorged waterway. "It will breach." The lower fields, the west fence, Dusty cursed under his breath. The west fence was already compromised by age and neglect. Were the creek to overflow, it would obliterate the barrier, unleashing the cattle. "We gotta drive the herd to higher ground," he declared, his tone laced with urgency. "Can you lend a hand?" Tala nodded, her expression resolute. "I perceive a path through the gully. It is swifter." Dusty hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. The gully was perilous under ideal conditions, let alone in this maelstrom. Yet, he trusted her intuition. He had no other option. They battled their way through the wind-whipped rain to the pasture. The cattle were pressed together, their eyes reflecting raw fear. Dusty whistled and yelled, attempting to steer them towards the gully. They resisted at first, but Tala, surprisingly adept at animal handling, moved among them, murmuring gentle assurances, her small hands nudging them forward. The gully had become a treacherous quagmire. The creek surged beside them, its waters mounting with terrifying speed. Dusty forged ahead, his boots sinking into the viscous mud, the cattle struggling for purchase. Tala remained at the rear, coaxing them onward, her voice a soothing balm amidst the pandemonium. Just as they reached the comparative haven of higher ground, a section of the west fence succumbed with a resounding crack. The creek, now a raging cataract, surged through the breach, inundating the lower fields. Dusty stood transfixed, his heart plummeting. But then he glanced at Tala, her face illuminated by another burst of lightning. She was smiling, a rare and precious sight. "We triumphed, Dusty Rivers," she proclaimed, her voice imbued with a quiet exultation. "The cattle find safety. The house continues to endure." He surveyed the ranch house, a stark silhouette against the raging storm, standing defiant. He looked at the cattle, huddled together on the rise, spared from the flood's wrath. He looked at Tala, her face smeared with mud and rain, her eyes blazing with an inner fortitude he'd never before recognized. He had been so consumed with safeguarding his land, with waging war against the elements, that he had nearly overlooked the fundamental truth. Tala hadn't merely assisted in saving the ranch. In some profound way, she had rescued him as well. She had bestowed upon him a purpose, a cause worth fighting for. And in doing so, she was gradually, deliberately, reclaiming her own path back into the light. Bandits at the door. The wind, still a banshee wail left over from the prior night's storm, rattled the window panes of the main house. Dusty, his face etched with fatigue, was mending a section of fence near the south pasture when he saw them. 3 riders, silhouetted against the bruised dawn sky, were approaching at a steady, purposeful pace. They weren't ranch hands, and they sure as hell weren't friendly. Dusty felt a knot tighten in his gut. He'd heard whispers in town about rustlers getting bolder, preying on isolated ranches. He dismissed it as idle gossip until now. He spat on the dry earth, tossed the fencing pliers into his toolbox, and started toward the house, his gait deceptively casual. Tala was outside, gathering kindling near the woodpile. She watched him approach, her dark eyes questioning. He didn't want to alarm her, but there wasn't time for gentle explanations. "Riders comin'," he said, his voice low. "Looks like trouble. Get inside, quick." Tala didn't argue. She knew the unspoken language of the land, the subtle shift in the air that heralded danger. She vanished into the house, a shadow swallowed by the doorway. Dusty grabbed his rifle from the porch, the cold steel a familiar comfort in his hand. He paused, glancing at the barn, then back at the approaching riders. They were close enough now to see the hard set of their faces, the glint of metal at their hips. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. He thought of Tala, alone and vulnerable inside the house. That thought fueled a surge of protective anger. Inside, Tala wasn't cowering. Her mind raced, drawing on forgotten lessons, the echoes of her father's teachings. She remembered the games she'd played as a child, stalking prey through the canyons, setting snares for rabbits. Those games were no longer games. She found Dusty's shotgun, its weight substantial in her hands. She checked the load, her movements surprisingly deft. Her fingers then flew to the pantry, grabbing flour and salt. The flour she stuffed into spare pillowcases, improvising a blinding defense. The salt, she knew, scattered on the hard-packed earth, would sting eyes and throw off balance. Dusty burst through the door. "Tala, stay back." "No," she said, her voice firm, resolute. "I can help." He looked at her, surprised by the steel in her gaze. He saw not the frightened girl he'd rescued, but a warrior ready to defend her home. He had no time to argue. "All right," he said, his voice tight. "Here's what we do." He outlined a plan, incorporating her suggestions. They would use the house as a fortress, creating choke points and ambushes. They worked quickly, efficiently, their movements synchronized. Dusty positioned himself by the front window, rifle ready. Tala took the back, shotgun in hand, the pillowcases of flour and salt strategically placed nearby. The air crackled with tension. The riders stopped just outside the fence, their horses restless. One of them, a burly man with a scar bisecting his left cheek, dismounted. He sauntered toward the house, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "Rivers," he shouted, his voice rough and gravelly. "Come on out. We know you're in there." Dusty remained silent, His eyes narrowed behind the window. "We ain't here to cause trouble," the man continued, his voice laced with false joviality. "Just need a few supplies, and maybe a couple of head of cattle." Dusty knew that was a lie. They wanted everything. He glanced at Tala, who nodded almost imperceptibly. It was time. The man reached the porch, his boots heavy on the wooden planks. He raised his hand to knock, and Dusty fired. The bullet shattered the silence, splintering the porch railing inches from the man's head. He bellowed in surprise and stumbled backwards, scrambling for cover. The other two riders spurred their horses forward, firing wildly at the house. Dusty returned fire, keeping them pinned down. Tala, meanwhile, slipped out the back door, moving silently through the tall grass. She circled around, approaching the riders from the flank. When she was close enough, she hurled a pillowcase of flour into the air. The wind caught it, creating a blinding cloud that engulfed the riders and their horses. They coughed and sputtered, their vision obscured. Tala followed up with the salt, scattering it at their feet. The horses, spooked by the sudden assault and the stinging salt, reared and bucked, throwing their riders. Dusty seized the opportunity, charging out of the house, rifle blazing. The bandits, disoriented and outnumbered, didn't stand chance. They scrambled to their feet, abandoning their horses and supplies, and fled into the hills. Dusty watched them go, his chest heaving. He lowered his rifle, the adrenaline slowly receding. He turned to Tala, who emerged from the tall grass, her face smudged with flour and dirt, but her eyes shining with triumph. He stared at her, a mixture of awe and gratitude flooding his heart. He'd thought he was protecting her, but she protected him just as much. "You all right?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "We did it," she said. Dusty knew, in that moment, that everything had changed. This wasn't just his ranch anymore. It was their home, and they would defend it together. A sanctuary forged. The echoes of gunfire dissolved into the vast Montana expanse. Tala, grime smearing one cheek alongside the residue of gunpowder, braced herself against the porch railing, her slight frame a study in improbable fortitude. Dusty, his rifle still a comforting weight in his grasp, observed her, his expression a complex blend of pride and apprehension. The air reeked of spent cartridges and the sharp, coppery scent of spilled blood. "You holding up, little star?" he rasped, his voice thickened with feeling. She nodded, her dark eyes trained on the far horizon. "I'm strong." A simple declaration Dusty understood, masking a roiling undercurrent. He registered the almost imperceptible tremor in her hands, the residual fear flickering behind her valiant mask. He crossed the distance and placed a hand on her shoulder, the rough texture of his callous skin juxtaposed against the delicate smoothness of hers. "We both are," he murmured. "We gave them a taste of their own medicine, didn't we?" Dawn painted the landscape in hues of rose and gold, revealing the raw scars of the previous day's violence, yet also highlighting an undeniable resilience. Dusty, Tala a silent shadow at his side, assessed the damage. The barn door was pockmarked with bullet holes, and a few fence posts lay in shattered disarray, but the damage was superficial. News like wildfire swept through the territory. Soon, whispers of the unhinged rancher and the feral Indian girl who had repelled a gang of rustlers were on everyone's lips. The tales bloomed with each retelling, blossoming into legends of uncanny accuracy and blood-curdling battle cries. But beneath the embroidered details, the core narrative remained. Dusty Rivers offered a haven, and Tala had defended it with unyielding ferocity. A week elapsed. Dusty, repairing a damaged fence line, noticed them, three figures etched against the amber canvas of the setting sun. Apache, he recognized instantly, judging by their posture, their attire, the very way they sat astride their mounts. His hand instinctively moved toward his rifle, but Tala stayed him with a touch. "Wait," she murmured, her voice a low vibration. "They are spent." As they drew closer, Dusty could see the truth in her words. Their faces were hollow, their clothes tattered and worn through hard travel. They carried no weapons, only modest bundles secured to their saddles. One was an elder, his face a landscape of wrinkles carved by time and hardship. Another, a woman, her eyes mirroring a deep, quiet sorrow. The third, a young boy, clutching a threadbare doll. The old man spoke first, his voice crackling like dry leaves. "We heard of this place, a sanctuary for those in need." Dusty hesitated, his mind a whirlwind of calculations. Resources were already stretched thin. Could he, in good conscience, offer refuge to more? But the plea in the woman's gaze, the fragile hope shining in the boy's eyes, decided the matter. "You are welcome here," he said, his voice steady. "We have little, but what we possess, we will gladly share." Relief flooded their faces, softening the harsh lines of exhaustion. The woman dismounted, helping the boy to the ground. The old man offered only a nod, his eyes eloquent with gratitude. Tala watched their approach, her expression an unreadable mask. She seemed to be evaluating them, weighing their worth, their intent. Dusty led them toward the bunkhouse, a dilapidated structure that once housed ranch hands. Cramped and dusty, it offered only rudimentary shelter. He showed them the well and offered a meager meal of beans and cured meat. Over the simple fare, the old man introduced himself as Chaska, the woman as Nalin, and the boy as Dakota. They were remnants of a small Apache band, driven from their ancestral lands by the relentless tide of settlers. They had been wandering for months, desperately seeking a haven, a place to simply exist in peace. "We heard the stories," Chaska said, his gaze meeting Tala's, "of the girl who fights with a warrior's heart." Tala remained impassive, her gaze flitting away. Dusty detected a spark of unease in her eyes. She was not yet prepared to embrace her past, to fully acknowledge her heritage. Later that night, as the wind howled outside, Dusty lay awake in his cabin, listening to the symphony of the ranch. The soft exhalations of the horses, the distant lament of a coyote, the quiet snores emanating from the bunkhouse. He had sought to carve out a solitary existence, a life of quiet solitude. But now his ranch was transforming into something far grander. It was becoming a refuge, a sanctuary for those with nowhere else to turn. And at the core of it all was Tala, the small warrior who had revealed the true essence of courage and compassion. He knew, with absolute certainty, that his life had irrevocably changed. He was no longer merely a solitary rancher. He was a protector, a provider, a guardian, and he would do whatever was necessary to safeguard his fragile sanctuary. Standing tall, before the last echo of Apache ponies faded from the hills, a buckboard clattered up the long dirt track toward the ranch house. Stripped to the waist, Dusty sweated as he muscled a thick timber into place on the corral, the mingled smells of pine resin and animal warmth filling the air. He straightened, swiping his forehead with a grimy forearm, and narrowed his gaze at the approaching conveyance. Beside the driver sat a man encased in a severe dark suit, his expression flinty. Tala materialized beside Dusty, a wraith of stillness. Her hand drifted towards the small blade at her waist. Dusty gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Stay close, little star." The buckboard jerked to a stop, puffing out a cloud of ochre dust that momentarily hung, suspended. The suited man descended, smoothing the cloth of his coat with meticulous motions. Tall and gaunt, his face seemed perpetually set in a frown. He carried himself with the clipped precision of new authority. "Dusty Rivers?" His voice, thin and reedy, cut through the quiet. "That's me." Dusty's gaze remained steady, unwavering. "I'm Agent Davies, Bureau of Indian Affairs." He produced a card from an inside pocket, offering it. Dusty ignored the gesture. "What brings you out this way, Agent?" Davies' gaze flicked to Tala, a statue beside Dusty. "I understand there's a Native American child in your care." "That's right. A girl." "Goes by Tala." An almost imperceptible tightening around Dusty's jaw. "She does." Davies cleared his throat, a dry, rustling sound. "This child is registered to the San Carlos Apache Reservation. I'm here to return her. Tala's fingers whitened on the grip of her knife. Dusty could feel the girl's coiled tension. She lives here now, Dusty stated, his voice a low rumble. Mr. Rivers, while I appreciate your intentions, the child belongs with her people on the reservation. It's the law. She is with her people, Dusty countered. She's with me. Davy's face hardened into granite. That's not how things operate. The government has a duty to these children to ensure their proper rearing and assimilation. Assimilation? The word tasted like ash in Dusty's mouth. You mean erase who she is? Force her to disavow her ancestry? We provide education, shelter, and vocational prospects, Davies replied, his tone rising a notch. Opportunities she'd never experience out here, living like this. He made a dismissive gesture encompassing the ranch, the simple, demanding existence Dusty had painstakingly created. She is all she requires here, Dusty retorted, his voice tight with contained anger. She's learning, she's thriving, she's secure. He looked down at Tala, his expression softening into tenderness. She's loved. Davy's gaze darted at Tala, then snapped back to Dusty. Mr. Rivers, I believe you fail to grasp the seriousness of the situation. Sheltering a Native American child without authorization is a federal offense. Furthermore, he paused, letting the unspoken threat resonate. This land, your ranch, its provenance is, shall we say, open to interpretation. Dusty's eyes narrowed to slits. He understood Davy's implications. The original land grant was ancient, its documentation blurred by time. A cunning lawyer, coupled with a sympathetic judge, could readily discover grounds to nullify it. Are you threatening me, agent? I am merely laying out the facts, Mr. Rivers. Cooperate, and I am certain we can circumvent any unpleasantness. Refuse, and, well, you leave me little choice. The air vibrated with unspoken menace. Only the drone of insects and the distant cry of a raptor punctuated the silence. Tala remained a silent sentinel, her gaze locked on Davies, assessing him with an old soul's wisdom. Dusty took a step forward, casting Davies in his shadow. This is my land, he declared, his voice like honed steel. And Tala is my daughter. She stays. This ranch is a refuge, a place where she is free to be herself, not the person you want her to become. You will not take her. Davies stood his ground, though Dusty detected a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He hadn't anticipated such resistance, this quiet, resolute defiance. You're making an error in judgment, Mr. Rivers. A grave one. Maybe so, Dusty said, but it's a choice I make with my eyes wide open. He gestured toward the buckboard. Now, remove yourself from my property. Davies hesitated a moment, then with a stiff nod, turned and clambered back into the buckboard. The driver snapped the reins, and the rig swung around, retracing its path, leaving behind a plume of dust and a lingering sense of foreboding. Dusty watched them recede, his hand resting lightly on Tala's shoulder. He knew this confrontation was not the end, but for the moment, they were secure. For the moment, they were united. And on Lonely Ranch, they would stand strong. A lasting legacy. The dust hadn't settled from Davy's departure before Dusty spurred his horse toward town, a whirlwind of determination in his wake. He needed documents, counsel, something tangible to validate the truth etched on his soul. Tala was his. The image of her small face, clouded with apprehension, spurred him onward. He wouldn't allow her to dwell in fear any longer. Hemmings, the lawyer, a man whose girth suggested prosperity, regarded Dusty's proposal with arch suspicion. Adopting a native child? Mr. Rivers, that's decidedly outside the norm. She needs me, and I need her, Dusty asserted, his voice a low, unwavering current. Is it feasible, or isn't it? Hemmings, detecting the unyielding grit beneath Dusty's rough exterior, conceded. Feasible, yes. Straightforward, no. Be prepared for inquiries, a thorough home assessment. Bureau involvement is almost certain. Dusty's jaw hardened. Then we'll face them head-on. The legal labyrinth proved a tortuous ordeal. Forms blurred before his eyes, crammed with questions that felt invasive and immaterial. The home assessment brought a thin-lipped woman to the ranch, her gaze probing as she scrutinized his finances, his ethics, his motivations. Each query felt like an indictment, a judgment on his solitary existence. He met each challenge, his gaze unwavering, sustained by the vision of Tala anticipating his return. Finally, the pivotal day arrived. Dusty, Tala nestled beside him, stood before the judge. Tala, freshly scrubbed and adorned in a simple gingham dress Mrs. Olson had stitched for her, gripped Dusty's hand. Her eyes, normally bright pools of curiosity, were wide with trepidation. "Dusty Rivers," the judge pronounced, his voice resonant. "Do you solemnly pledge to raise this child, Tala, as your own, to provide for her welfare, both physical and emotional, and to respect her heritage?" "I do," Dusty affirmed, his voice unwavering, his gaze locked on Tala. "Tala," the judge continued, a note of warmth entering his tone. "Do you wish to be adopted by Dusty Rivers?" Tala tilted her face up toward Dusty, her eyes searching his. He offered her hand a reassuring squeeze. A hesitant smile bloomed on her face. "Yes," she breathed, barely a whisper. "I want to be Tala Rivers." A tidal wave of emotion surged through Dusty, so profound it nearly robbed him of breath. He was a father. He had a daughter. He had a family. Life mellowed into a comforting rhythm. Dusty taught Tala to ride, to shoot, to master letters and numbers. She absorbed knowledge readily, her mind a sponge. He recounted stories of his past, of his kin, of the aspirations that had drawn him to this untamed land. She, in turn, offered glimpses of her earlier life, faint echoes of the auction, accounts of her people and their ancient customs. He learned of the Apache reverence for nature, their intricate societal structures, their profound connection to the spiritual realm. Years flowed by like water over stones. Tala matured into a vibrant young woman, lithe and resilient, imbued with the same fierce spirit that had captivated Dusty from the beginning. She became proficient in English, yet never abandoned her native tongue. She embraced Dusty's teachings, yet also pursued her own understanding, devouring every book she could find, challenging every assertion. The ranch thrived under their shared stewardship. Dusty's herd expanded, and Tala displayed a natural affinity for animals. She possessed a rare gift with horses, pacifying even the most fractious mustangs with her soothing touch. She also developed into a skilled healer, acquiring knowledge of herbs and natural remedies from the local women, both Anglo and indigenous. Dusty observed her, his heart brimming with paternal pride. He had offered her sanctuary, but she had bestowed upon him something far more precious, a purpose, a family, a renewed faith in the future. One cool autumn evening, Dusty sat on the porch, captivated by the sunset's blazing palette. Tala joined him, settling onto the swing beside him. "Papa," she murmured, using the endearment she had adopted long ago. "The elders from the reservation, they seek my help. They need shelter just for the winter months." Dusty regarded her, his eyes reflecting understanding. He knew the essence of her request. "This is your home, Tala," he responded, his voice thick with emotion. "And what you possess, they're welcome to share." Dusty passed away peacefully in his sleep, a few years later, with Tala at his side. The community grieved deeply for him. He was remembered as a rough-hewn yet just man, a dedicated worker, and a steadfast friend. But for Tala, he was infinitely more. He was her rescuer, her champion, her father. Standing at his graveside, overlooking the ranch that had served as their refuge, Tala made a solemn vow. She would perpetuate his legacy of empathy, of uniting cultures, of providing succor to the vulnerable. She would honor his memory by leading a life of purpose and integrity. The wind rustled through her hair, carrying the scent of sage and pine. She closed her eyes, conjuring Dusty's face, his weathered smile, his kind eyes. "I will make you proud, Papa," she whispered. "I promise." Tala Rivers rose to become a respected leader within the community, a vital link between the white settlers and the native tribes. She wielded her knowledge and her influence to advocate for justice and equality, to foster understanding and mutual respect. She remained rooted in her heritage, tirelessly championing her people. Dusty's legacy endured, not only in the land he had cultivated, but in the heart of the woman he had rescued and cherished as his own.